Would you kill for a chance at having your dream home? Or would you pour endless amounts of money into one just to make your partner happy? Many of us would go to the ends of the earth for our spouses, but in today's world, that can be a fatal mistake. Shanti Cooper loved her husband and would do anything for him. But as it would turn out, she never truly knew him. Unfortunately, this would cost her hundreds of thousands of dollars and her life. Today's case is truly heartbreaking and might just make you more suspicious of those who are close to you. It might even make you question how well you really know them. Welcome back to Cold Case Diaries, where we shed light on mysterious cases from across the globe. Join us as we take a look at the still developing case of Shanti Cooper. But first, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to like and click the bell icon, as it motivates us to create more intriguing content for you. Now, without any further delay, let's dive in. Orlando, Florida is the vacation destination for anyone looking to hit up some theme parks. The city is home to the infamous Disney World, Universal Studios, SeaWorld, and much more. Despite its large number of tourist destinations, Orlando is home full-time to around 300,000 people. Not only do residents get to enjoy the parks, they are only a little over an hour away from beautiful beaches. Even though Orlando has a lot to offer its residents, it's not without its downfalls. Florida regularly deals with severe hurricanes that force people to rebuild their homes again and again. Even when it's not raining, weather in Orlando can be difficult, with it being humid a majority of the time, and temperatures usually being above 80 degrees, even in the fall and spring. The city also has a relatively high crime rate, largely attributed to a bustling nightlife and the constant influx of tourists. Today's story, however, does not involve outsiders. The people involved all gladly called Orlando home. At age 34, Shanti Cooper was finally feeling settled into her life. Despite being recently divorced, she really couldn't ask for more. She had her son Jackson, who was 3 at the time, and she and her ex, Jim Cooper, they split custody of Jackson, with him spending time at each of their houses. Shanti had also launched an incredibly successful financial software business. The best part of it was that she could work from home every day, giving her more time to spend with her son. She loved to take photographs of the scenery around her and enjoyed a good trip to an aquarium. All in all, in 2013, Shanti was truly happy. Despite her recent divorce, Shanti was still open to dating. She met David Trones, who was 46 at the time. The two hit it off almost immediately, but there was just one snag. He lived all the way in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Still, the pair bonded, partially over their recent divorces. In fact, they both fell for each other so hard they decided to move more quickly than the average couple. They couldn't bear the thousands of miles keeping them apart, and within a few months, David drove himself down to Orlando for good, moving in with Shanti and her son. Shanti and David had an instant connection, and it was something that many of her family and friends noticed. When they initially met David, they weren't quite sure how to feel about him, especially given that he made some pretty bold claims. According to one source, David had told Shanti that he had recently inherited somewhere between $4 and $6 million from his father's estate. Despite this, they could clearly see that Shanti was head over heels, so they gave David a chance, and slowly he grew on them. By all appearances, their relationship seemed great and like it was moving in the right direction. In April of 2015, David bought them a gorgeous house in Delaney Park, an upscale neighborhood of Orlando. The house sold for just over $600,000, which the realtor considered a steal. Aside from being a large house in a good neighborhood, it also came with a pool and a separate apartment over the garage. Since Shanti and David were not yet married, they decided that the house should only be in his name, and he created a trust that named himself and his mother. Shanti told her family she was okay with this, and that there was no need to worry about mortgage payments, because he had bought the house entirely in cash. At the time, this didn't raise red flags, despite the fact that David never went to work. Everyone just assumed he bought the house with his inheritance. Once the family moved in, they started to work on making it their dream house, beginning renovations almost immediately. That's how life continued for a while, until David popped the big question: and the two married in February 2017. They were truly in love, and everything seemed to be perfect, with David adding nothing but good things to Shanti's life. That is until one day in 2018, when Shanti confessed to her friend that they had to move all their belongings into the apartment above the garage, and that David was sleeping in the garage with the dog. One look at the house made it very clear why the move had happened. The house was almost entirely gutted. In fact, there was barely anything even holding it up. It was almost entirely wooden frames and subfloors. It seemed as though the renovation projects hadn't gone according to plan, and the two needed some serious help if they were going to make the space livable again. David had the idea to call in reinforcements, specifically Keith Ory, a star on the show Zombie House Flipping. The show is known for taking abandoned properties and flipping into upscale living arrangements. When David first showed Keith the house, he was in shock, claiming he had never seen such a bad starting point as this. Still, Keith was not one to back down from a challenge. In April of 2018, he had convinced the rest of his team to have the Trani's house featured on an episode of the show, with Shanti and David signing all the paperwork and agreeing to the terms. They were set to start filming in May, and would hopefully put an end to the stress that was renovating David's house. Unfortunately, Keith and his team would never get the chance. On April 24, 2018, in the late afternoon, David makes an urgent call to 911. When the operator asked him what the emergency was, he said that his wife Shanti had fallen in the bathtub and was unresponsive. The operator dispatched an ambulance and asked David to stay calm and tried to talk him through CPR. Instead of administering the treatment, David told the operator that he already tried that before he called, and he thinks that Shanti must be dead. Tragically, David was correct. When paramedics arrived on the scene, they found Shanti Cooper, aged 39, dead in the bathtub. However, that is not all they found. To the paramedics, something about the scene seemed off compared to other slip and falls they'd responded to, so they asked the dispatcher to also send the police to the scene. Upon arrival, the officers agreed that there was something wrong with the way Shanti was found. They took photos, had her body sent to a medical examiner, and they asked David to come with them to the station. He readily agreed, believing that he had nothing to hide from them. When they began questioning David, they first asked where he was when Shanti died. According to him, he had gone out to take the dogs for a walk, and when he came back, he found her floating in the tub. Here, the detectives stop him, noticing the first discrepancy in the story, both in his story and the call to 911. David claimed that Shanti was floating in the tube. However, when paramedics arrived, both the tube and Shanti were completely dry. Not a drop of water in sight. When the detectives pointed this out, David simply did not have an answer. While he was being questioned, Shanti's body was being examined, and the results of the autopsy were sent to the detectives to see if they corroborated David's story. Shockingly, they did not. Shanti's official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. The trauma might have been explained by a slip and fall, but the strangulation could not be. Additionally, the level of trauma that Shanti had sustained was not consistent with a fall. She had a bloody eye and a bruised cheek. Again, when asked how he might explain this, David had no answer. When he did have answers to questions, they weren't very believable. Detectives asked him why there was blood on their bed frame. He tried to say that it was period blood from a few days before, but the location of the blood didn't align with this theory. After 14 hours of questioning, David still could not give detectives a satisfactory explanation of what had happened to his wife. Finally, he gave them a suggestion. Maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe someone had broken into the house to steal something, and in the process they killed Shanti. While his theory was shaky, there was some potential there. Police had noted that there was a few $1,000s missing from the house, as well as Shanti's engagement ring, which was worth around $15,000. Detectives had no choice but to release David, despite how much they believed he was guilty. However, Shanti's family and friends, devastated as they were, could not believe that David was the culprit. In fact, a few of them spoke out in support of him, saying that there is no way he would have done this to the love of his life. One friend reportedly met David at home when he was released. She said that she looked him over and saw no scratches or any other indication that he had been in a struggle. Police had no choice but to investigate other leads while keeping a close eye on David. Other than her current husband, police had two possible other suspects. The first was her ex-husband, Jim Cooper. However, he was cleared almost immediately as he had a solid alibi. Even without that, no one would have believed he had any motive to kill Shanti. Despite their divorce, they had a common interest in their son, and there was no reason to change that dynamic. The other possible lead was David's, or in other words, a mysterious burglar. They began to canvass the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen any suspicious characters lately. A few people said that they had seen a homeless man hanging around a nearby park. He had stood out to them all because he looked like the actor Woody Harrelson. Detectives did their due diligence and tracked this man down. It became clear to them almost immediately that he had nothing to do with the murder, leading them to a dead end. This brought them back to their original suspect, David. However, they needed more than just some circumstantial evidence. What they really needed was a motive and to prove that he was lying about the events of that fateful April day. To do both, they spoke with Shanti and David's friends. Upon doing so, they learned quite a few interesting things about this supposedly perfect relationship. All the renovations had come at a high cost, and not just in terms of the emotional turmoil it caused. Estimates put the total cost of the renovations at around $250,000, on top of the $600,000 already spent to buy the house. This was a hefty price tag and would have caused strain on any relationship. Police learned that there was an additional layer to this financial strain. Shanti was the one footing the bill for all the work being done in the house. People close to the couple claimed that David had become obsessed with having the perfect house, but wasn't putting a dime towards making it happen. They also stated that Shanti desperately wanted to finish the project and just fully move in. She also wanted David to add her name to the title now that they were married, and since she was putting so much money into the house. David, however, refused to do either of those things. When police had asked David if the renovations had put any strain on his relationship, he told them no, it absolutely did not. He claimed that Shanti had no problem with how long the renovations were taking, and that she was excited to be on the show. Keith Ory tells a slightly different version of that story. He claims that during all his meetings with the couple, Shanti seemed to be hesitant. She also seemed to be angry with David and concerned that even with being on the show, the projects would never come to an end. Keith also told police that after they signed the final contract days before her death, she immediately left the house without a word. It was clear to him that something was amiss. In addition to speaking with those who knew the couple, police named David a person of interest and put out a call for information. This is where the case took an unexpected turn. They soon received a call from a worker at Club Orlando. The club has a sauna, steam room, and many other amenities, and is meant for men only. The caller stated that David was a frequent patron, which in itself is not shocking. The surprise came when this employee stated that he would often see David having sex at the club with other men. Immediately, this put police on high alert. If David was having affairs and Shanti found out, that could be his motive for the crime. To be sure, however, police asked Shanti's friends to see if she had already known about what her husband was up to. They were all certain that she hadn't known, and if she had, she would have left him. To the police, this was all the confirmation they needed. David did not work, and they learned that he did not have a multi-million-dollar inheritance. If Shanti found out about his affairs and tried to leave him, then he would have no way to fund his lifestyle. They theorized that she found out about his activities, threatened to leave, and he killed her. Earlier in their investigation, police had also found something that could point to David's motive for killing Shanti. In one of his interviews, David admitted that Shanti had a life insurance policy worth $250,000, and he was listed as a beneficiary. Months after her death, David had still not been given access to the money. However, if he had been able to fool people into believing her death was an accident, he would have definitely cashed in on the policy. On August 29, 2018, a little over 4 months after Shanti's death, David Tronies was arrested on the charge of first-degree murder. Up until this point, he had not hired representation, but upon his arrest, he did hire two lawyers, Robert Mendel and Gregory Greenberg. In his initial hearing, David was remanded into custody without bail or bond. He would be waiting for his day in court behind bars. Upon hearing about the arrest, friends close to the couple were shocked. Police arrested David at his mother's house where he had been staying. When they searched through his belongings, they found evidence that without a doubt should not have been there. Among his possessions was a small box containing Shanti's missing engagement ring. To police, this solidified the idea that there had never been a burglary. To David's supporters, this was a wake-up call that maybe they didn't know him as well as they thought they did. Despite the arrest, police knew that their work was not done yet. They needed more evidence if they were going to be able to convict David. They placed cameras facing his home in Delaney Park, hoping to catch who was coming and going. The only people entering the house were David's attorneys and their team. However, this would not be a dead end. One of David's lawyers noticed the cameras and assumed the police must be watching them, presumably due to a guilty conscience. The next day, Robert Mandel called the prosecutor in David's case, Ryan Vescio. He told Vascio that they were in possession of some possible evidence that needed to be turned over. This evidence turned out to be the sheets from Shanti's bed that were removed after her murder. They were full of blood, and the defense decided that this might be evidence in the trial. At the end of the phone call, Prosecutor Vascio asked Mandel if there was anything else he wanted to share. The defense had held onto the sheets for 11 months, so Vascio suspected that they might be hiding other things. Mandel claimed that there was nothing else. However, the very next morning, Mandel called back to say they were turning something else over, a green cord. According to Mandel, they had removed it from the house because David was threatening to kill himself. To Vascio, this doesn't explain why they made the decision to keep the cord in an evidence bag instead of just throwing it out. He had a strong suspicion that this cord was used to strangle Shanti. Unfortunately, when they sent it off to the lab for testing, there was no DNA, evidence on it that could prove it had been used to strangle Shanti. Vascio believes that it still could be the murder weapon, but it was wiped clean sometime during the many months before it was turned over. Given the clearly broken chain of custody, even if it had contained Shanti's DNA, the cord would have likely not held up in court. Following this turnover of evidence, both of David's lawyers excused themselves from the case. They are also both still under investigation for evidence tampering and accessory after the fact based on how they handled the sheet and cord. In 2020, David hired a new attorney on his case, Richard Zaleski, who strongly believed in his client's innocence. The fiasco that was the presentation of the sheets was not entirely a waste. Even though David claimed the blood on the sheets was menstrual blood, testing ruled that it was not. Police took this new bit of information into consideration with a couple of other factors. When they found Shanti that afternoon, she had only been wearing one earring, and the other was on her nightstand. Additionally, her phone had not been used since 11:30 p.m. on April 23rd. Police's theory is that David and Shanti got into an argument on April 23rd, and it turned physical. While she was in the middle of getting ready for bed, David attacked her, killing her in the process. This would explain the missing earring and the blood on the bed. Afterwards, he brought her to the bathtub. This does not explain why he waited until the following afternoon to call 911. Based on the evidence, police believe Shanti died between midnight and 2 a.m. on April 24th. This idea was further corroborated when Edward Gizmoni, David's former cellmate, came forward to talk to police. Edward claimed that in the time he had spent with David, he had admitted that Shanti had discovered his secret affairs and threatened to tell everyone. According to Edward, David snapped and killed Shanti. While this may seem like it was the final nail in David's coffin, both prosecutors and the defense were hesitant to believe this story. After all, Edward was also a felon and might have a possible motive. Their conversations with Edward did turn up another possible piece of circumstantial evidence. Edward mentioned that the two of them had bonded over their shared love of hallucinogens, specifically sapo, which is a poison derived from a frog in South America. Edward claimed that David told him that you could put sapo in salsa and slowly kill them. This would have seemed like an extravagant lie, if not for the fact that detectives had already spoken with David's ex-wife, Carol A., and those close to her. When asked about David, Carol's friends admitted that at one point they believed he was poisoning her. According to them, once they were married, Carol began to have all sorts of health issues that she didn't have before. Carol herself denies these rumors, claiming that these health issues have been ongoing even after her divorce. Shanti's friends also mentioned that she had started to have health problems, including an emergency appendectomy. At the time, health professionals had attributed this to appendicitis. However, according to Vasio, poisoning symptoms can mimic appendicitis. He has no way to prove these claims though, but it still keeps him up at night. When police spoke to Carol, they also asked her about her shared bank account that she kept with David. Detectives found it odd that she would still share finances with her ex-husband, because that is an unusual situation. She claims that she forgot about it. However, in the years since their divorce, that bank account has held various amounts of money, sometimes totaling over hundreds of thousands of dollars. Investigators find it hard to believe that she was completely unaware of this, but can't prove where the money came from. It is just one more piece of the puzzle that does not sit right with them, despite not being hard proof of any wrongdoing. They believe that Carol is still managing David's finances while he is behind bars. When they had done an initial search of the house, investigators had taken her computer into evidence. This would prove to be more helpful than they originally thought. On the computer were a large number of what could be considered diary entries, and many of them were about David. The ones that were dated earlier in the relationship were full of love for her new man. In one of the entries, Shanti wrote Dave, "I will have to say, I think this will be a delicious detour. Amazing, magnificent, life-changing detour. I have had a pep in my step since we started this little email affair." However, when they read on to more recent entries, it was clear that the once happy relationship had started to sour. Shanti begins writing more negatively about David, calling him narcissistic, cheap, and controlling. This is not the first time that someone had called him cheap. It is suspected that part of the reason the renovations on the house were taking so long is because he refused to hire outside help but was too lazy to do it on his own. On more than one occasion, the couple would argue about this at length before he finally agreed to hire someone. In one of Shant's later letters, she writes, "I don't feel mentally healthy at this time, and a lot of the poor and unhealthy feelings are due to our interactions," she wrote in an undated note. "I never feel like I do anything right. Unless I am being perfect, I have ruined your day, your life. Another day of crying, another day of being depressed and asking myself what I am doing wrong. Oh, the answer is to be nice." Even though she led everyone on the outside to believe she was happy, her letters reveal the truth. This helped solidify in the police's minds that Shanti would never have been okay with David cheating on her. If he was truly treating her so poorly that it was causing her mental health to decline, then police are sure the affairs would have been the tipping point. While the letters confirmed their suspicions, detectives knew that they would not be considered evidence in court. Brian Vasio retired from the state's attorney office in 2019, before David's case ever went to trial. However, he is still very much involved. He is currently trying to ensure that all of Shanti's estate goes to her son, who is now 13 years old. Part of this estate is the life insurance policy, which could go a long way in giving Jackson a brighter future. Jackson currently lives with his father in Florida and is constantly advocating for an end to the court proceedings on his mother's case. David Tronis still has not officially gone to trial. After his arrest, investigators spent some time putting a case together, while David's team worked on his defense. The date kept getting pushed back until 2020. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, courts shut down while cases continued to pile up. Due to this, David continued to sit in Orange County Prison. When asked what he thinks about the time difference between Shanti's death and when David called 911, he simply said that just because her phone wasn't used after 11:30, that doesn't mean that she died around midnight. He believes that it's possible Shanti just didn't use her phone all day on April 24th. Zaleski has also played a role in getting the trial delayed post-COVID. In one appearance at court, David had himself declared incompetent to stand trial. Zaleski claimed that David was suffering from ongoing manifestations of the diagnosis of schizophrenia. One factor that helped him make his case was David's haggard appearance. Apparently, he was being targeted in the prison and had been jumped. David was placed in solitary for a while, but at this point, he was already back in with the general population. The judge sent David to a mental facility to recover and be reevaluated. If at any point his mental state were to recover, then the trial would continue. It was the hope of many that David would recover so that justice could be served. Throughout all of this, there are reports of David sending letters and calling his mother. What is so unusual about these communications is that he is obsessively asking about what bills she is receiving for the house and whether or not they are being paid. Many who knew David in 2018 would tell you that he was obsessed with the house, and it was the one thing in his life he didn't want to lose. This leads to the police's theory of motive and the desperation David might have felt if he thought he was losing his house. In January of 2023, David again appeared before the court, where he was declared fit to stand trial. Zaleski still has a few tricks up his sleeve. However, he intended to have David plead not guilty by reason of insanity. If he can do so successfully, David would live out the rest of his days in a high-security mental institution. Many believe that this would not be justice served. Jackson has been vocal in his belief that David, who was once a father to him, is just trying to avoid punishment for what he has done. Others, close to Shanti, wish the death penalty for David. They believe he robbed this world, and Jackson, of a kind and loving soul, and for that he deserves the ultimate punishment. It might be hard to imagine, but a couple of decades ago, it was common to leave your doors unlocked at night. Most towns were places where everyone knew each other and walked in out of each other's houses freely. But the problem was, you could never truly know if the people around you had good intentions. In fact, without even knowing it, you could be opening the door to a true monster capable of turning your whole family upside down. This case has twists and turns that even seasoned detectives could not see coming. The case of Christine Jessup's murder is a complicated one, and despite decades of searching for answers and finally finding the perpetrator, the conclusion will still leave you with more questions than answers. Now, without further delay, let's dive into our second case for today. In 2023, Queensville, Ontario is considered to be a small village and is technically a part of the town East Gwillimbury. Its population is estimated to be 632 people. There isn't much to the main part of Queensville other than a cemetery, post office, church, a park, and a community center. The only other notable piece of information that can be found online about the village is that it was home to the largest antique mall in the York region. Unfortunately, that mall closed back in 2019. Queensville got its name in 1843 in honor of Queen Victoria. Before that, it was named Four Corners and then Hackett's Corners after the man that owned the general store. Despite its short history and modern-day simplicity, residents of Queensville are still happy to call the village home. It's close to many modern-day conveniences, with a touch of old-world charm. Many of the houses that are still around today were built back in the 1800s, making many people feel like they are walking through history every day. As you might be able to imagine, Queensville was even smaller back in 1984, the type of place where everyone knew everyone. Most people would even leave their doors unlocked. But this small town would be forever rocked on one October afternoon. The Jessups like to consider themselves a normal family. One boy, one girl, two loving parents. Even so, they weren't without their fair share of struggles. A few months earlier, Bob Jessup had been arrested for conning some elderly family friends. He had been sent to Toronto East Detention Center for an 18-month stint. Still, Janet Jessup tried to keep life as usual as she could for her 14-year-old son, Kenny, and her 9-year-old daughter, Christine. Janet loved her children fiercely and wanted nothing but the best for them in this world. Despite her sometimes tough exterior, she had a true soft spot for her daughter. Christine herself was a lovable young girl who was enthusiastic about life. She had a deep passion for animals that extended far beyond her beagle, Freckles. She also had a pet frog named Harold, and once she had slept outside with some baby chicks so that they wouldn't be alone. She also loved watching baseball with her brother, even though he was older than her. Christine also had a budding passion for music and had been over the moon when her teacher passed out their recorders that day in school. Janet had decided that on October 3rd, she would go visit her husband and take Kenny with her. As much as Christine would have loved to see her father, Janet didn't think that a detention center was appropriate for someone as young as Christine. Instead, she sent the little girl to school as usual, trusting she could handle walking home from the bus, as she had done many times before. Janet was very used to Christine being able to get around town on her own. After all, in a place so small, it was hard to imagine anything going wrong. She saw that Christine's jacket and backpack were in the house, and that her bicycle was lying in the shed. Janet noticed that Christine had even remembered to bring in the newspaper. Janet probably just assumed that Christine was out playing with a friend, and she would have been right if everything had gone according to plan. After seeing that her mother and brother weren't back yet, Christine grabbed a nickel and went to the store to buy a pack of gum. Earlier, before Christine had left school that day, she and her friend Leslie Chipman had agreed to meet in the park at 4 p.m. This park was located just across the street from the general store. In such a small town, the walk from her house to the store to the park shouldn't have taken more than a few minutes, and it was a route that Christine knew well. Leslie was right on time to meet her friend at 4 p.m., but Christine was nowhere to be found. So Leslie waited and waited, but eventually she assumed that Christine had changed her mind, and she went home. Around the same time, Janet was starting to worry that maybe everything wasn't okay like she had originally thought. She decided to take another look around her home for any clue as to where her daughter might be. Christine's jacket was there, yes, but it was hung on a hook that she knew was too high for her daughter to reach. And Christine's bike, it looked like the kickstand had been damaged. Slowly, Janet started to fill with panic. Before allowing herself to completely freak out, she decided to call around to all her daughter's friends' houses. It wasn't until she heard about the missed playdate with Leslie that she fully allowed herself to panic. She replayed the last hour in her mind. Christine had only been alone for 20 minutes before they had gotten back from the detention center. Janet tried to convince herself that nothing could have gone horribly wrong in that time. Finally, Janet decided to call the York Regional Police. She knew that kids in the area did go missing from time to time, but they were almost always found within 48 hours. She also knew that in most of those cases, the child had run away or been abducted by the other parent. Janet knew that there was no way either of those were true, since she had just seen her husband locked up and Christine had no reason to run away. Many parents say the same thing, but Christine would literally call Janet to say hi when she was gone for just a weekend. Janet did the right thing by calling the police, but unfortunately, the York Regional Police were in no way prepared to handle a case like this. They committed just about every major fox pass that they could when handling a missing child's case. For starters, when they went to the Jessup house to get more information from Janet, they didn't stop to secure the house. Instead, they allowed any number of people to walk in and out, touching and tainting what might have been crucial evidence. To their credit, the police moved quickly after they received Janet's call. They set up a base in the local fire hall and started to organize search efforts with volunteers. Members of the community combed the area, looking anywhere they could think of for the missing girl, but they had no luck. Authorities released Bob so he could return home and assist with the search for his daughter. When the police sat down with the family, they asked a lot of questions. The most important one was, who do you think could have done this? They were operating under the assumption that whoever took Christine knew the family well. But in a village as small as Queensville, that list was very, very long. The days ticked by agonizingly slowly, with no news or updates from the police. 90 days after Christine vanished, the Jessups got the call that they had been dreading. A body had been found, and the police were pretty sure it was Christine. 56 kilometers east of Queensville, in Sunderland, a man named Fred Patterson and his 2 daughters were looking for their dog. It was New Year's Eve, and they were looking forward to welcoming 1985. Before they could celebrate, they had to find their dog. The search took them onto the wooded property next to theirs. When the trio rounded a bend in the path, they spotted what appeared to be a pile of garbage. As Fred got closer, he realized that it was a corpse, one that had been badly decomposed. When police arrived on the scene, they noted that the body was dressed in a turtleneck and a blue pullover, which matched the description of what Christine had been wearing on the day she went missing. They also noted that she had been stabbed repeatedly and that her underwear was laying on the ground next to her right foot. Not too far away, they found a recorder with the name Christine Jessup written on it. With the discovery of her body, York Regional Police decided to transfer Christine's case over to the Durham Regional Police, specifically to Inspector Robert Brown. Despite everything they knew so far, they were still wildly unprepared to take on a case of this magnitude. Brown decided to split his detectives into two teams, and whichever team came up with the better suspect would take point on the case. Bernie Fitzpatrick and John Shepard were one of those teams. They worked their way through every name that Bob and Janet had provided and came up empty. They decided to go back to Christine's parents thinking that they must have missed someone. On February 14, 1985, Shep and Fitz sat down with Bob and Janet and asked them to start from the beginning. After pressing over and over for any new possible suspect, Janet mentioned their next-door neighbor, Guy Paul Maureen. Guy was 25 at the time, and he was a very quiet person. He lived next door to the Jessups with his parents and siblings. The whole family was considered to be a little quirky, choosing to fix things up instead of buying them new, and other things like that. Still, there wasn't much about Guy that Janet could really point to as suspicious. The only thing that she could say was that Guy hadn't helped search for Christine when everyone else did. That little piece of information was all Fitz and Shep needed. They took some time to investigate Guy, but didn't find much. He had a few speeding tickets, but nothing else worth mentioning. About a week after Janet pointed the finger at him, the detectives decided to go talk to him in person. Guy was open to talking to them and didn't seem to be guarded. When asked how well he knew Christine, he just said that they were neighbors but rarely interacted. One time he helped her catch her dog when he got loose, and on another occasion they had talked about gardening. He had also helped install a water heater in the Jessup's house. Other than that, he had never really interacted with the young girl. He also said that he didn't help with the search because he was busy helping his dad install tile around the house and figured they wouldn't be missed. The detectives thought this was a flimsy excuse, so they asked Guy what he thought of Christine. He said that she was sweet and innocent, but sometimes they grow up to be corrupt. This was quite a shocking statement to police, especially since he had offered it completely unprompted. They couldn't do anything without more evidence. However, what detectives knew that almost no one else did was that a hair had been found in Christine's necklace. They created a ruse to get a hair from Guy without him realizing what it was for. They had both samples rushed to the lab for testing. When it came back that the hairs were a match, the detectives knew they had their man. Guy was arrested on April 22, 1985, 6 months after Christine had gone missing, and 3 months since her body had been found. Despite the arrest, this story is far from over. Guy went to trial where the prosecution presented their best case against him. Unfortunately, their best wasn't good enough for the jury, and they found him not guilty. The detectives were sure they had the right guy, so they pushed the prosecution to try again. The not guilty verdict had devastated Christine's family and the community. They believed that a murderer had got free. Then May of 1990, the ruling was overturned, based on the claim that the judge had incorrectly explained what reasonable doubt meant to the jury. The prosecution was given the chance to try Guy again for Christine's murder. The second time around, the trial went in the opposite direction, and on July 31, 1992, Guy Paul Maureen was found guilty of Christine's murder, despite him still professing his innocence. He was sentenced to life in prison and was sent to a federal facility. However, justice for Christine and Guy both was not done on that day. An organization formed on the outside with the sole purpose of proving Guy's innocence. With their help, he hired an excellent lawyer who could point out all the flaws in the case against him. By the time Guy's lawyer filed for an appeal, he had spent almost a decade fighting these charges, a large portion of which from behind bars. Luckily for him, there was plenty wrong with the case, and he was released on bail while his appeal was processed. Here are just a few glaring holes in Guy's case. The supposed hair match was not based on any sort of DNA. Back in 1985, there wasn't much analysis that could actually be done on the hairs to prove they came from the same head. More than anything, hair analysis was supposed to be used to say two hairs did not match. In Guy's case, his hair and the hair found on Christine simply looked the same under a microscope, so they were considered to be a match. This did not take into account how degraded the hair was from spending so much time outdoors before Christine was found. There were red fibers supposedly found on Christine's body, and Guy had rough carpet in his vehicle. It later came to light that the red fibers belonged to a sweater the lab technician was wearing the day she processed the evidence, and she hadn't worn a lab coat. The biggest piece of evidence that assisted in Guy's appeal, though, was that he had clocked out of work on October 3, 1984. He worked 57 kilometers away. This means that even if he was speeding, he wouldn't have arrived home until 4:14 p.m., 4 minutes after Janet arrived home and noticed Christine was already gone. At trial, Guy's family testified that he did not get home until 5:30 p.m. because he had stopped for groceries and gas that day. The prosecution brought in a witness to discredit their testimony, saying that the family was just protecting him and covering for him. Even if he had gotten home at 4:14 p.m., it still would have been too late unless the timeline shifted. When the case first went to trial, detectives went to Janet and suggested that maybe she had gotten home later than she initially thought. At first, she stuck to her original story. There were several other issues with the prosecution's theory of the crime, but even these points alone were enough to prove that Guy didn't do it. Still, Guy's lawyer knew the appeal process would be an uphill battle. To assist in his defense, Guy asked if he could be exonerated through DNA testing. But he didn't mean the hair sample that was found on Christine. When processing for evidence, police had also found a semen sample, but at the time, they couldn't do anything with it. A decade later, though, Guy was sure that the DNA evidence would set him free. On the other hand, the Crown wholeheartedly believed that the DNA would prove once and for all that he had killed Christine. So both sides agreed to the testing. The results came back just days before Guy's third trial was set to begin. They proved without a doubt that the semen did not match Guy's DNA. He was innocent. The overturning of his conviction sent waves through the community for so many reasons. For starters, Christine's family now had to deal with the fact that they didn't know who had killed their daughter. They had to start all over again. Others in Canada still believed that Guy had done, but that he had somehow outsmarted the justice system. Perhaps the biggest impact was made within the police force. An inquiry was launched into the investigation of Christine's murder to see what had gone wrong and how they could stop it from ever happening again. No one was officially reprimanded for imprisoning an innocent man, but his case did define how the Canadian police would handle similar cases moving forward. It is also worth noting that neither of the detectives responsible for Guy's arrest ever apologized to him, believing that at the end of the day, they didn't do anything wrong. Any potential leads had long since dried up, and Christine's case was officially cold. The Durham police did decide to transfer her case to the Toronto police, possibly because of how poorly they had handled it in the first place. Every few years, the Toronto police would issue a news release, hoping the public would be able to help them generate leads. For most cold cases, these types of releases would only get a handful of responses, but for Christine's case, the police would get hundreds. Despite the quantity of tips that they received, none of them were usable, and the years just continued to pass. Eventually, Steve Smith joined the Toronto Cold Case Unit, and he was just the set of fresh eyes that they needed. In 2019, he attended a conference that focused on using forensic genealogy in police work. Essentially, police could take DNA from a crime scene and run it through the database. Normally, if there weren't any direct matches to the suspect, that is where things would end. With the genealogy testing, samples were run for familial matches. This meant the sample could return matches for someone who was in the system who was related to the perpetrator. For example, a suspect might not be in the system, but their brother is. So, when the DNA is run, it returns as a familial match, specifically a brother. From there, police can look up the family tree to find their suspect. In December 2019, the results showed that there were 2 matches, each third cousins to the suspect. This meant that police would have to build a huge family tree with roughly 33,000 names that they would then have to narrow down to their man. This would be an incredibly daunting, if not impossible, task. Luckily, one of the matches was on the suspect's maternal side, and the other was on his paternal side. This meant that police could work from both sides and narrow down their suspect pool drastically to about 400 names. Eventually, through a long process of elimination, Steve Smith finally had the name of the man who killed Christine Jessup. His name was Calvin Hoover. Upon finding the name, detectives were sincerely shocked. His name had barely appeared in their investigation, being mentioned just twice. Calvin and Heather Hoover had married in the late 1970s. After moving around a bit, they settled in the Toronto area. Calvin adopted Heather's 2 sons that she had had before they got together. They also went on to have 2 children of their own. The Hoovers met the Jessup family through work. Bob, Calvin, and Heather all work at Eastern Independent Telecom. Calvin did installations, and Bob was the lead installer. The 2 families eventually became closer, often visiting each other's houses for get-togethers, even though they lived around 50 kilometers apart. While Bob was in prison, Janet and Heather grew close together and often relied on her for some support to keep her sane. As she cared for her 2 children, Janet had no fear in sharing details of her life with Heather, including letting her know when she would be away from home visiting Bob. So, Heather knew that Christine would be home alone, and by extension, so did Calvin. Calvin Hoover does not have a great track record among friends and family. He was known for having a nasty streak, and no one was safe when he was in a mood. Many who knew him described him as extremely selfish as well. His wife also knew him to come and go at all hours due to the nature of his job, so she probably didn't question it at all when he was gone on October 3rd. For her part, Heather lent her support to Janet after Christine went missing. She headed over there in the days after to see what she could do to help. While there, the police asked her where she had been on the day of the disappearance, to which she said she was at work. When they asked where her husband had been, she said she assumed he was also at work. Calvin wasn't there with her for the police to talk to, and they never asked him to come in for questioning. He was simply crossed off their list right there and then, without ever talking to the police. Throughout the entire investigation, Calvin stayed in the shadows, never once throwing suspicion on himself. But he did make trouble in other ways. Around the time that guy was exonerated, Calvin started drinking heavily, becoming a regular at the local pubs. It's possible that he believed police would find him soon, as he knew Guy had been cleared through DNA. So what if that's how they were going to find him? There are also other possibilities as to why he was drinking so much. He and Heather had been going through a rocky path after having to downsize their home. He was gambling, doing drugs, and drinking. One night, he even got drunk and crashed his truck. The police suspended his license for a year after that. Calvin was on a downward spiral, and he was taking his family along with him. One day, Heather decided she had had enough, and the 2 got a divorce. Calvin became a wanderer after that, rarely staying in any place for long. Eventually, he found a woman named Joanne Rocca, and the 2 got married in Vegas in 2003. They seemed to have a lot in common, including their love of gambling. Just 6 years after their marriage, Joanne unfortunately passed away, which sent Calvin into a deep depression. He even attempted suicide by motor vehicle in 2014, but he survived. Despite all of this, no one even remotely suspected that Calvin was responsible for Christine's death. In fact, when police told the Jessups who had killed Christine, they couldn't even remember who Calvin was. It took a few minutes before they recalled that he had worked with Bob all those years ago. If it weren't for the DNA testing, Calvin might never have been caught, and the case never solved. Unfortunately for the family, he would never have his day in court. In 2020, when Detective Steve Smith went to look up Calvin Hoover in the hopes of arresting him, he found an obituary. For years, Hoover had been battling with mental illness and was on various medications. Finally, After over 3 decades, the Jessup family could be at peace knowing who had killed their beloved Christine, even if they never knew why. The confirmation of Calvin as the killer opened a door to an entirely new investigation. On July 30, 1985, 8-year-old Nicole Maureen left her apartment to meet a friend at the pool. It's important to mention that there is no apparent link between Nicole Maureen and Guy Maureen, despite the shared last name. Nicole never made it to the pool to swim with her friend. And similar to Christine's story, after a while, her family started to worry and search for her. Unfortunately, Nicole was never seen again. The details of these two cases are eerily similar. Unfortunately, in Nicole's case, her body has never been found, and no one saw the young girl disappear. This is the biggest obstacle when it comes to solving her disappearance. Without her remains, detectives can't look for DNA evidence or determine a cause of death. It is possible that the family will never have closure, especially given that Calvin Hoover is not here to give any answers and left no clues in his suicide note. On February 25, 1984, the life of 19-year-old Donna DiMacho was tragically cut short, her body carelessly left in a shallow burial. For nearly 40 years, the truth of this cruel act was shrouded in mystery, until another woman was marked by the same perpetrator. What took almost 40 years? Uncover the truth. What key evidence led to the breakthrough? In the case, we'll explore the mysterious case of Donna, a chilling murder from 1984 that at last found its resolution after close to 40 years. Without further ado, let's dive into our final case for today. East Windsor, nestled in Mercer County, New Jersey, lies at the heart of the state. Characterized by its suburban ambience, it's conveniently positioned near significant urban hubs like Trenton and Princeton. This township boasts a mix of residential zones, bustling commercial spots, and serene, natural settings. With an array of parks, leisure centers, and cultural landmarks, East Windsor ensures that both locals and tourists have a plethora of outdoor and communal activities to indulge in. However, beneath this peaceful facade, the town would be the backdrop for a horrendous crime. Donna DiMacho was born on October 16, 1964, in the serene East Windsor in Mercer County. Born to Betty Lou Thompson Macho and Ronald Wayne Macho, Donna was their treasured child. As time went on, the family grew with the birth of Julie in 1969. A new chapter began when their mother Betty rediscovered love and tied the knot with Garland. This union brought together a loving, united family. Welcoming the change, Donna and Julie warmed up to their doting stepfather. Donna's exuberance was unmistakable, shining through her passions for culinary arts and tailoring. While working diligently as a legal secretary, she also dreamt of being a model. To Julie, Donna was a shining presence. No matter the adversity she faced, Donna's luminosity remained undimmed, and she approached every day with positivity. Sadly, she remained unaware of the heart-wrenching twist her life was destined for, which would leave an indelible mark on her loved ones. On the evening of February 25, 1984, 14-year-old Julie was enjoying a quiet Saturday at her family's residence in East Windsor. Spotting her elder sister, Donna DiMacho's car, outside, she decided to join her in the basement. The duo immersed themselves in a marathon horror movies until 2 a.m., after which Julie headed up to her room to retire for the night. Above, their mother, Betty, and stepfather, Garland, were soundly asleep, oblivious to any potential odd noises or disruptions from below. The next day, February 26, 1984, Donna was scheduled to be at her job at a law firm. Her absence during the daytime hours didn't initially cause concern. However, when dinner approached and Donna was yet to come home, anxiety grew within Betty. Distressed over her daughter's whereabouts, Betty went down to Donna's basement apartment to search for clues. Upon stepping into Donna's typically tidy apartment, Betty was met with an unsettling scene of items thrown everywhere. The chaos strongly suggested a struggle had transpired there. The alarming sight of clothes marred with blood further deepened Betty's dread, prompting her to call the police. When law enforcement reached the location, they sifted through every inch of the basement, searching for any clue to shed light on the enigma. Their meticulous efforts identified faint fingerprints near a bedside table, Realizing the potential weight of this discovery, the prints were carefully preserved for evidence alongside the soiled garments. Additionally, they detected remnants of bodily fluids in the bedroom, a crucial lead that seemed promising in guiding them towards the offender and aiding the quest to locate Donna. March 1984. A somber discovery was made when Donna DiMaccio's vehicle, stained with blood, was found near a wastewater treatment facility just about a mile from her residence. Yet, despite this lead, the enigma of her vanishing persisted. Detectives sifted through innumerable records and conscientiously questioned the locals in proximity to Donna's home. The investigation witnessed a notable shift when various individuals, including Nathaniel Harvey, a former farmhand in the vicinity and an East Windsor local, fell under suspicion. Harvey had been previously arrested and held for his purported participation in multiple assaults and a harrowing homicide in Plainsboro. However, despite these suspicions, no immediate connections to Donna's case, including those involving Harvey, were established. The crucial evidence, the bodily fluid discovered in Donna's room, was sent for examination. However, DNA testing methods of that era weren't as sophisticated as they are now, making it challenging to conclusively identify the origin of the fluid. Yet, the investigators remained undeterred, holding on to the hope that future leads would help them solve the puzzle surrounding Donna's tragic end. The magnitude of this sorrow proved overwhelming for Donna's stepfather, who, heartbreakingly, died just half a year following Donna's disappearance, intensifying the family's pain. In their relentless quest to find the perpetrator, the family spared no effort. They employed private detectives, expert trackers, and even turned to psychics for insights. They channeled every resource at their disposal, depleting all their savings. Yet, their hope remained undying. They clung to the slim chance that their dear one might still be breathing, possibly injured but alive. After pursuing every conceivable lead and still coming up short, Julie and her mother took the hard step of relocating to Texas in 1987. Yet their path to recovery encountered another setback when their storage facility was broken into, depriving them of irreplaceable memories. The culprits heartlessly made away with family photographs, treasured keepsakes, and 16 boxes brimming with case files, deepening their heartache. 11 years passed with no developments. However, on April 2, 1995, law enforcement received a call from a Boy Scout group. They had stumbled upon a body near Cranberry. The state of the body was grievously deteriorated, almost entirely decayed. But once the dental records were matched, the realization was profound. They had uncovered the key piece in the long-standing puzzle. The remains were Donna DiMaccio's, wrapped in a carpet, hidden within a forested area close to a cranberry farm and not too distant from where her vehicle had been located. Following an autopsy on the discovered remains, preliminary results suggested that Donna had tragically been a victim of a gunshot to the head. As the investigation advanced, specialized professionals at the Middlesex Regional Medical Examiner's Office took a more in-depth look into the remains. Their thorough analysis revealed a fatal head injury, but its categorization as a gunshot wound remained uncertain. Consequently, the cause of death was updated to evidence of homicidal violence. Donna's demise retained its classification as a murder. But, with this pivotal lead failing to bring about definitive answers, the momentum of the investigation dwindled and Donna's case sadly descended into the realm of cold cases. In February 2022, under the guidance of Mercer County Prosecutor Angelo Onofre, there was a renewed focus on the DiMaccio case. As part of this fresh investigation, all pertinent evidence encompassing DNA specimens underwent rigorous reevaluation at the State Police's Central Regional Laboratory. The intention behind this was to harness contemporary forensic methodologies and innovations in the quest for answers and justice. Cutting-edge DNA techniques became instrumental in illuminating previously obscured aspects of the case. The bodily fluid evidence discovered in Donna's room underwent a meticulous reanalysis, leading to a compelling match with Nathaniel Harvey's DNA. Remarkably, his DNA was the solitary genetic evidence in the room that had no reason to be there, as noted by the Attorney General's office. This discovery served as a pivotal turning point, offering much-needed resolution to the enduring puzzle. Nathaniel Harvey, born in 1942 in East Windsor, had a history marred by delinquency from an early age. He seemed magnetically drawn to mischief and consequently spent a considerable portion of his life incarcerated. In 1968, he married, though the details about his spouse remain undisclosed. Residing in East Windsor, Harvey's criminal record was extensive. He earned a reputation as a brazen trespasser, as highlighted by the West Windsor police, with a conviction for assault also on his record. It was widely believed that Harvey frequently infiltrated homes with lax security, targeting young women as his captives and subjecting them to violent episodes. Given his notorious history, law enforcement always had him on their radar, deeming him a possible lead in numerous investigations. One notable case linked to Harvey involved Irene Schnaps, another resident of East Windsor. Between 1984 and 1985, local communities including Plainsboro and West Windsor were plagued by a surge in break-ins, heightening residents' anxieties. Law enforcement juggled these concerns alongside unresolved cases like the murder of Irene Schnaps and the baffling case of Donna's disappearance from her family residence in East Windsor. A mere 16 months after Donna vanished, East Windsor was shaken by another tragedy. Irene Schnaps, a 37-year-old widow grieving the recent loss of her husband to cancer, met a tragic end. What the law enforcement officers found was deeply distressing. Irene Schnaps had endured over 15 brutal strikes to her head, presumably by an axe or hatchet. The crime scene was ghastly. Irene's lifeless body sprawled on the bedroom, drenched in her blood. Among the harrowing evidence, a blood-tinted footprint on a pillowcase emerged as a significant clue, potentially holding the key to unraveling the circumstances of her tragic end. Peter Stowasser, aged 41, came forth, volunteering information to the detectives. Identifying himself as a close associate of Irene Schnaps, he intimated that he might have been the final individual to interact with her before her death. After revealing his bond with Irene, the trajectory of Stowasser's life shifted abruptly. The authorities made recurrent visits to his residence, and on June 17, 1985, he was taken to the Middlesex prosecutor's office. There, he underwent hours of intense questioning pertaining to the tragic end of Irene. Stowasser acknowledged developing an affectionate inclination towards Irene, hoping for a potential romantic relationship. Yet Irene, in the throes of mourning her husband's death, sought solace and time before contemplating a fresh romantic endeavor. While Stowasser awaited the opportune instance to profess his feelings, he kept their relationship platonic. He often included her in his social circles, hosting neighborhood barbecues to ensure she felt integrated and not isolated. But their prospective romantic tale met an untimely pause with Irene's untimely death, casting a cloud of suspicion over Stowasser. The police secured a search warrant for Stowasser's home. In their search, they found a quilt with suspicious stains that might have been from blood. In Stowasser's vehicle, they retrieved a set of white work gloves and a metal strip with what seemed to be reddish markings. Tests showed that the quilt had human blood and hairs that appeared to align with the victims. Despite this, Stowasser claimed the quilt stains were from the menstrual blood of a different woman he was seeing. On October 28, 1985, a pivotal moment in the case unfolded. That day, Nathaniel Harvey went on a violent spree in the southern region of West Windsor, marking a critical juncture in the investigation. The first report to the dispatch center described a harrowing event at Dutch Neck Estates. There, a 13-year-old girl had just avoided being kidnapped from her residence. The intruder had tried to silence her with his hand over her mouth, aiming to abduct her. Fortunately, her resilience triumphed. She broke free and screamed loudly, drawing her parents' attention. The sudden noise startled the assailant, prompting him to run away. After leaving Dutch Neck Estates, the perpetrator broke into another residence, likely seeking refuge from law enforcement. Upon his intrusion, the homeowner confronted him. Upon lighting the room, he found himself face to face with Nathaniel Harvey, who menaced him with an axe. Sensing the impending threat, Harvey quickly reacted, smashing the glass door using a forceful swing of the axe, and then vanished into the forest. Harvey's eerie fascination with axes was evident. he frequently brandished these intimidating weapons to terrify his targets. Even when once armed with a knife during an assault, he falsely asserted to have an axe, magnifying the dread. Law enforcement was quick to note that the believed murder weapon in Irene Schnapp's death was an axe, drawing another sinister link to Harvey's method of operation. Soon after, during a thorough search of the vicinity, officers spotted Harvey moving across a soybean field before he dashed into the forest. Authorities promptly moved in, converging near the Princeton Arms Shopping Center. Interrogation revealed the magnitude of Harvey's criminal activities. He admitted to numerous burglaries that had unsettled the local residents, but the depths of his wickedness were further unveiled when he detailed a recent assault. Before the unfortunate death of Irene, Harvey had kidnapped a young girl from East Windsor, dragging her to a derelict structure along Dutch Neck Road. After detaining Harvey, the 13-year-old victim was asked to confirm whether he was her attacker from October 28, 1985. With her brave testimony, she positively identified Harvey as the man who assaulted her. Due to the sheer brutality and disturbing nature of the assault, officials decided not to press charges, thinking of the potential emotional toll it might have on the young victim. Among stolen items from different burglaries, they discovered a Seiko watch, confirmed to be Irene's and missing from her residence since the day of her murder. This discovery firmly linked Harvey to the heinous act. Interestingly, investigators learned that Harvey's wife lived in the same apartment block as Irene. This detail remained undisclosed due to the wife's dependence on state aid. Moreover, during his interrogation at the West Windsor Police Headquarters, it emerged that Harvey initially confessed to killing Irene when presented with various evidence. Amidst the high-stress environment, Harvey sought a conversation with his father, who urged him to take the right path. Consequently, Harvey confessed to the murder of Irene Schnapp. In 1986, Harvey was found guilty of Irene Schnapp's murder, yet by 1990, the state Supreme Court reversed this conviction, declaring that Harvey's confession was procured without properly advising him of his Miranda rights. Harvey, now asserting that his admission was forced, promptly withdrew his confession. This development cast doubt on the legitimacy of his original admission and sparked discussions about the necessity of reiterating his Miranda rights after his conversation with his father. The accuracy of Harvey's confession became a hot topic as contrasting stories surfaced. Avid Kleiner Harvey's legal representative claimed that Harvey never admitted to Irene's murder, a statement at odds with the police's version, where they affirmed he had. Despite the absence of a recorded confession, the initial judgment was withdrawn based on the court's determination that, following his request to consult with his father in 1994, Harvey's Miranda rights should have been reiterated. During the retrial, attention centered on the vital blood evidence from the crime scene. Prosecutors introduced DNA, results which demonstrated genetic markers consistent with both Harvey's blood sample and the stains on a box spring in Irene Schnapp's residence. While DNA analysis was relatively nascent, the test suggested that Harvey couldn't be excluded as a source. Strengthening their argument, the prosecution's experts employed dot intensity analysis. This method approximated the similarity between the crime scene blood traits and Harvey's DNA, suggesting such a match might arise in only 1 out of 1,400 African American individuals. In response, the defense experts posited that the probability could be as frequent as 1 in 50. Ultimately, Harvey was found guilty and sentenced to death. Yet, when the state Supreme Court affirmed this outcome in 1997, it did so divisively. Justice Alan B. Handler, voicing his dissent, meticulously reviewed the extensive 64-page DNA test analysis presented. He aired his reservations, anticipating that a state or federal court might overturn this ruling in the future, as highlighted by a New York Times article dated May 15, 2005. Kleiner's allegations drew significant media attention, notably in the New Jersey segment of the Sunday New York Times. He also took issue with the DNA evidence from Harvey's second trial, deeming it incorrect and tainted. Kleiner also spotlighted lost evidence, emphasizing the missing hair strands from a quilt. He voiced doubts about the categorization of the obtained hair, pointing out an initial Caucasian label, later appended with and one neuroid hair. He contended that the entire hair evidence, along with related notes and microfilm, had inexplicably disappeared, leading him to speculate that such evidence might never have existed. In April 2007, Judge John F. Malone of the State Superior Court delivered a verdict that thwarted Harvey's aspirations for a fresh evidentiary review, dismissing his appeal. He invalidated Harvey's 1994 death sentence due to insufficient legal counsel during the early 1990s. Nevertheless, Harvey, at the age of 65, remained under a 70-year sentence for a distinct offense. His 1994 death penalty had been converted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole after New Jersey terminated the use of capital punishment in 2007. Before this change, Harvey endured 2 decades on death row, even though New Jersey hadn't enacted an execution since 1963. In a concluding turn of events, Harvey passed away at the Statewood State Prison in Bridgeton in late November 2020, effectively ending any prospective inquiries into the matter. Peter Stowasser emerged as a person of interest in Donna's murder. Macho's remains were unearthed in 1995, not far from Irene's crime scene. Reports suggested that both Macho and Stowasser attended Mercer County College in the fall of 1983. Notably, after Macho's disappearance, Stowasser was absent from the spring semester classes he had initially signed up for. Still, Stowasser asserted that, despite his attendance at the college, he had neither known Donna nor had any links to her. There were also suspicions around Harvey's involvement with Donna, given the proximity of the location where Donna's remains were found to a farm where Harvey had once worked. Moreover, Donna's deserted car was found near a wastewater facility, a short walk from Harvey's home. These intriguing circumstances drew the law enforcement's scrutiny towards Harvey, contemplating his potential role in the case. Colonel Patrick Callahan, the head of the New Jersey State Police, remarked that even after 40 years, the tragic end of a young life continues to echo in the hearts of those who cherished her. She was heartlessly buried in a makeshift grave by the very monster who took her life, and her remains lay untouched for over 10 years. Yet the passage of time has not dampened the need for justice. Although the criminal ultimately found himself imprisoned for another vile act and died in 2020, the breakthrough in this case remains momentous. We salute the unwavering dedication of the Central Regional Cold Case Task Force and the devoted forensic experts from the state police. Their combined efforts have hopefully provided some measure of peace to the victim's mourning family. The unwavering commitment of the police and forensic specialists underscores the fact that justice has no expiration date. What's your take on today's 3 cases? Let us know in the comments below. Also, make sure to like, share, and follow our channel for more gripping tales from the world of true crime. Until our next story, stay vigilant and be safe.